Well, hello everybody. Welcome once again to these videos in which I'm talking a little bit about the violin and the Alexander technique, a combination of them both. I've been teaching the Alexander technique now for, well, over 20 years. And I've been thinking about my violin playing in terms of the Alexander technique, the way that we use our bodies, the way that we coordinate ourselves. This has been a central focus, if you like, in my own journey as a musician, and I also teach with the same principles in mind. One of the most important aspects of playing the violin, I believe, is how we support our instruments. Now, we're all, we spend, as violinists, especially as upper string players, we spend a lot of time thinking a little bit about support, the shoulder rest and chin rest and whatever. If you go on to these, violinist forums or Facebook forums for violinists, there will inevitably be a very long discussion about comfort and this or that shoulder rest. And I think some people, they end up spending hundreds of pounds on these kinds of devices. Of course, some of them are extremely well produced and work extremely well for some people. However, I would like to consider that playing the violin really, of course, we need good support from the accessories, if you like. We need to learn how to hold the instrument. But I'd like to consider that support for all our playing really comes from the ground. It comes from under our feet. And that if we allow that sort of upthrust, I think we call it the ground reaction force, if we allow that to really support all our efforts in movement, then we are on a good road towards violinistic freedom. If you watch the very greatest violinists, and I mean the very greatest, most celebrated players, you'll often see that they're very, very well organized on their feet. They're not stiff. There's plenty of movement in the ankles, there's plenty of movement in the knees, and all of this, I think, is an absolute prerequisite for fine playing. In fact, I think it was the violinist Pinker Zuckerman who said, well, violin playing starts at the feet. And of course, with this, I completely agree. The next things to consider is the notion as well that I think many teachers have of using the back. We must use our backs to play, and of course this is certainly something that we see happening in the very greatest players again, and surprisingly we see it happening in young children before they've had a chance to develop sort of all sorts of compensatory maladjustments, as I often like to call them. We see the back working really well in older players who have maintained their playing at a very significant level. One thinks of, well, Jascha Heifetz, Casals, Rubinstein, Horowitz on the pianist side, Nathan Milstein, and others as well. But these are sort of very notable examples of musicians who've used themselves very, very well, and whose playing, I think, has often got better as they've got into their later years, quite extraordinarily so. There are definitely examples of many fantastic players in their 20s and 30s who start to deteriorate from there on in. Without being controversial, I would say that Yehudi Menuhin, the wonderful violinist, of course, and did many interesting things in his life, was an example of somebody who really struggled when he got out of the sort of his earlier years, he struggled with his playing. He was looking for solutions to problems of tension and coordination. And I think we can see that despite the wonderful musical message that does shine through, of course, in his playing, there was this background of difficult support coordination or technique, as we might loosely call technique. So I'd like to consider today one of the things which I think is something we should all try, whether or not we stick with the idea. I think exploration is a very important part of any musician's journey. I'm going to suggest that we look at playing the violin without a shoulder rest and without anything at all, not even a sponge or handkerchief, so that we are getting to the stage where we can really just think of the violin being more or less supported with the left hand, but also to support the violin in such a way that it is able to move and also to provide a solid but flexible platform for action. And so on. Now, I think one of the things that has happened over the years to the art of violin playing, and of course we still have some wonderful violinists, but I think the essential thing that I miss when I listen to violinists of this current era is the sense of individuality, the colour that comes out of somebody's playing. Possibly this has to do with the fact that we have to learn everything so quickly, we're moving around, there are so many more distractions, possibly even a lack of patience, possibly a slightly different physical structure. I think people have got taller, sort of necks have got longer or whatever, this kind of thing. But I think that in general, I think we like to seek the easiest solution. Now, that is a perfectly rational and intelligent approach to many, many subjects. But I think that if we go back to what I was saying a little bit earlier about musicians who are playing extremely well into their later years, I get the sense that they took a great deal of time over the proper basics, the basics, if you like, below the basics, the very, very the fundamentals of playing the violin, holding the violin, drawing a bow, the bow change, the string change, and relating all of that to again what I was saying at the beginning, this sort of platforms for our expression, our physical platforms, and the wider environment, the atmosphere, the atmospheric pressure. Again, we are supported completely from the floor, from the air, and visually, again, our attention of the widening field, if you like, the wide attention that we can have as we play, is again feeding into our intrinsic sort of mechanisms of balance and poise. Now, coming back to the Alexander technique, Alexander really made some very interesting discoveries about poise. He didn't really talk a great deal about balance, but I think it would be fairly well implied that if somebody is not using themselves well in the terms that we're looking at our sort of human structure, then it would be very true to say that the balance would be pretty much in trouble as well. So easy upright balance, and of course not necessarily upright. I mean, we're always in movement. We can bend, we can take up any shape. Certainly playing the violin, where we can have a variety of shapes. So we sit and stand for a start. We have to share stands with a desk partner if we play in the orchestra. So the whole idea of there being sort of a fixed position is quite erroneous, and is not the case. But it's these fundamental basics that I think most of the great players do better than anybody else. And I would like to introduce you to some thoughts that count, really, when we're talking in the Alexander world about direction, how we direct ourselves, how we go about thinking about doing what we are doing, and of course a lot of the time in life we're sort of fairly much on automatic pilot. But there are ways of thinking that we can use, our constructive thinking, that can help us along in our journey on our violinistic journey, and any musical journey really, or if you're a singer as well, of course. And it's this barrier, I think, that the difference between what we think is happening and what is actually happening. This is where the Alexander technique is so sort of supremely useful for musicians. And nowhere is this more important than holding the violin and performing some of the most basic movements and it's by giving us our attention to the whole of ourselves, the whole of our physiology from the ground up, that we can start to understand the fact that the hands that we use, the fingers that we use to play, are really the end link in a very long chain. And when we can start to access the true power of our backs, then we are able to use our hands and arms with a great deal more freedom. Less localized effort, if you like, but an effort which is spread throughout the whole of our structures. So we don't need to worry too much about using our backs. If we stop the things that are stopping us from using our backs, tightening our necks, tightening our legs, fixing in a joint, then we will be at a huge advantage. Now I'll talk a little bit about that in the next series of videos, but I think for the moment I'd like to just send you away with an idea, and that is just to get an idea when you're practicing of where the contact points are under your feet, and just to notice how much movement is available without losing the essential 3-point contact. You'll find that we are able to sort of bend and go into lots of different motions and still maintain that easy 3-point contact, sort of like the foot's tripod, the heel, the area just in front of the heel and behind the toes. In the next lesson I'll talk a little bit more about this, and I'll also talk a little bit about another fundamental basic, the act of pressing a finger down onto a string, or using the fingers to create dynamic changes and articulations with the bow. Thank you for listening in, and look forward to seeing you very soon.